Hey folks, welcome to our very last week of new reading material for class. Next week is just finals week, and all that happens then is that your last papers are due. I hope that you've seen the prompt for those and are working hard on them. Remember, they're a little longer and definitely a little more in-depth than our previous papers, so be sure to spend plenty of time on those. They're also worth 30% of your grade, so it would be a mighty good idea to spend some time on those. This week, we're looking at John Rawls, who is a very recent philosopher, especially compared to the folks that we've been reading all along. Rawls is still a dead white guy, unfortunately, so there's really no escaping that. But Rawls died very recently. He died in 2002. He did most of his big philosophical work in the 70s and 80s. He wrote an incredibly famous book called A Theory of Justice, and this paper, Justice is Fairness, is a sort of very short summary of two major principles that form the sort of the backbone of Rawls's theory as a whole and of that book. So Rawls is going to argue that, basically, being just involves being fair. Now, it's interesting, I think, that we're ending the course looking at what justice is, because if you remember, we started off the course with these kinds of questions. What is justice? What is virtue? What is piety? And now here we are. We're still doing, well over 2,000 years later, much the same work in philosophy, but you'll note that it happens very differently, and you might think some about how it compares to the kind of work in the same vein that folks like Socrates and Plato were doing, even though now we're doing the same sorts of questions, but we're answering them very differently. So Rawls is going to say, to start off, this is not a stupid project, me saying that to be just requires you to be fair, because you might think justice and fairness are the same thing, but they're not. But he's going to say to be just, you have to be fair. And he thinks that, importantly, utilitarians like Mill, who we read last week, get this wrong. Now, Rawls is talking not about ethics so much as he is doing political philosophy here. So Rawls is talking about justice as a feature of institutions, so of individual policies, of actions of government, and the way that we set up our society and our government. So we're really doing political philosophy here rather than strict ethics. But we can still compare this to utilitarianism, even though utilitarianism is a more ethical theory, because utilitarianism will also have things to say about how we should set up society. So it's important to note here that when we're talking about justice, we're talking about justice of laws, rules, and institutions. And further, he's going to have one more caveat. He's going to say, look, when I talk about just institutions, I don't mean to say that any institution or policy that's just is good, right? There are other features that matter. But justice, we think, is a feature that really does matter, especially when you're forming a society or setting up a government. So we need to know what's just, and that might not tell us everything we need to know about an institution, but it'll tell us an awful lot. So Rawls is just going to come right out. He's going to say, look, here are my two principles. Here's what it takes to be just. There are two things that we should all agree to. First of all, everyone, he says, has an equal right to as much liberty as possible, until having any more liberty would make someone else less free. So there are two parts of this first principle. First of all, we all should have equal liberty. And second of all, we should all have absolutely as much liberty as possible, as much freedom to do things as we can have without encroaching on someone else's freedom to do things. There's a famous summary of this that says, my freedom to swing my arms around ends at your nose. So I can swing my arms around, metaphorically, or I guess literally, as much as I want, until it would hit you in the face, basically. So until it harms you or stops you from doing what you want to do, I should be as free as possible, and we should all be as free as possible because equality matters. Second, he'll say, well, there are some cases where we can ignore the first principle. We can sometimes have inequality, but we can only have inequality when making things unequal makes everyone better off. So there's no way that we can unequally benefit just a few people and make some people worse off as a result. So let's look a little bit at the liberty principle. He says this is the most important principle, because the second one, as I just said, sort of modifies it. So this is the really important one. So why should we have equal liberty, he says? Well, because this seems fairly obvious, because we should treat equal people, equal things, equally. If people really are equal, and he thinks they are, then we have no reason to give some more liberty than others. So, okay, it seems like we should have equal liberty. But we can't stop there, because it would be dumb to say, well, look, we should just all have equal liberty, and it ends up that, that would be satisfied even if we all had none. No, right? Clearly this is no good. We need to have equal liberty and lots of liberty. We should be as free as possible to do the kinds of things that we want to do the kinds of things that make our lives better. This is Rawls's most basic principle, and what everything that we talk about for the rest of the week will flow from.